Have you ever wondered why some people, even though time has taken them away from your life for a long time, still leave a void that cannot be filled? Even though life has moved on, new relationships have come, but just a moment, a scent, a familiar song, their image appears clearly, as if they had never left. Maybe you call it nostalgia, undying feelings, regret. But if you go deeper, hidden behind those feelings is a paradox that Carl Jung once emphasized. Maybe what you are anxiously searching for is not the other person, but a part of yourself, the part you lost when they left. According to Jung, human psychology does not operate linearly or rationally, but is guided by deep unconscious layers, in which the people who have passed through our lives often play the role of a symbol, not just a flesh and blood person, but the embodiment of a part of our soul that once awakened, once lived, once so real that we cannot forget. When you miss them, it may not be because they were the only person you ever loved, but because they awakened a part of you that later relationships have never touched. The paradox lies in this. The more you try to forget, the more you avoid the pain, the stronger the memory of them appears. Because in Jung's analytical psychology, the rejected does not disappear, it only retreats to the background, a place called the shadow, and from there, it silently controls emotions and behaviors and nameless desires. The person you lost may be the symbol of a period when you were sincere, brave in loving, and were yourself without hesitation, without defense. And when they disappear, not only are they gone, but that part of you is also sealed, hidden, even denied. The question to ask is not, do I still love them? But, what did I lose in myself when I lost them? Because most likely, you are not just missing a person, but a version of yourself, someone who believed in love, who lived fully, who felt worthy of being seen and loved completely. And that is why the loss never goes away. Not because you cannot let go, but because you do not truly understand what you have lost that is deeper than that person. Carl Jung once said that what we are not conscious of becomes fate, and it will continue to repeat itself until we are willing to look directly at it. The fact that someone who has passed away is still strongly present in your mind is not a sign of weakness, but rather a message from the unconscious. There is something in you that is still unseen, unintegrated, unreconciled. Every pain is a door. Every memory is a guide, and every person you have lost can be a mirror of your soul, waiting to be recognized. So instead of trying to forget, try looking back. What did they awaken in you? And why can't you live fully with that, even when they are no longer around? This is not a story about whether they will come back or not. This is a story about you. And maybe the fact that you can't forget them is the first sign that you are being invited back to yourself. There is a kind of memory that never goes away. It is not in old diaries or faded photos. It lives in the deepest part of your mind, where the unconscious stores everything that the conscious mind has deliberately forgotten. It is the memory of a person. It is not necessarily the greatest love, nor the most ideal lover, but it is the person, when mentioned, your soul sinks a little, your chest tightens slightly, and you cannot explain why. You can go a year without thinking about them, but then all it takes is a rainstorm, a song, or the light reflecting through a window one afternoon. Memories come flooding back like a wave. No specific scene, no clear words, just a feeling so familiar that it makes you stop in the middle of your busy life and listen to yourself. That feeling is not love that has not ended, but the part of you that was real, that was undisguised, that was yourself, when you were with them. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The part of us that was rejected, that was not alive, or that was so painful that it was pushed back into the background of the mind. And that shadow does not disappear. It just waits for a symbol to come alive. In this case, the person you lost could be that symbol. Not because they were perfect, not because they were the only one, but because they awakened a part of you that no one else could touch. The memory of them is therefore not simply nostalgia. It is an unconscious bell. It reminds you that there is something in you that is still unfinished, still not integrated into the whole of who you are today. Maybe you have forgiven, moved on, lived a full life according to society's standards. But maybe you have also lost a version of yourself that was once honest, once trusting, once undefended when you lost them. And the shadow of that part of yourself is still waiting to be recognized. The danger of the darkness is not that it exists, but that you do not acknowledge its presence. You try to suppress that memory with reason, with the belief that it's over, that that person is no longer important. But the more you deny it, the more it spreads. It appears in other forms: unexplained depression, unfounded anger, or worse, emotional numbness in new relationships. You wonder why you can't love someone deeply enough, why your heart seems to be closed. And the answer may lie in a place you've never dared to touch: that memory, that person, that shadow. Jung once said that what we are not conscious of will control our lives, and we will call it fate. Maybe the fact that you keep falling into unfulfilling relationships or can't open up to anyone else is not because you are too picky, but because your unconscious is still attached to the old shadow. Not the person, but the version of yourself that lived fully when you were with them. You don't miss them. You miss yourself. Of that day, there is a bitter but necessary truth. There are people who come to make us never be the same again. They don't come to stay. They come to open a door, let us see the soul that we once hid, and then leave. And we will live on, but never the same again. The question is, have you actually walked through that door? Or are you still standing at the threshold, looking back, not daring to move forward? One of the most obvious manifestations of the shadow is repetition. You are attracted to the same types of people, falling into the same types of pain, repeating the same emotional cycles over and over again. It is the unconscious trying to bring the shadow to light, to make you realize that you are not just looking for a person, but for a lost part of yourself. And to heal, you do not need them back. You need to step into that memory, not to relive it, but to dialogue, to look directly, to bring that part back. This journey is not easy, because the darkness in your memories is not always beautiful. It may come with hurt, betrayal, or things you did that still haunt you. But Jung taught that only when you face it, only when you integrate both the light and the dark, can you truly become whole. And sometimes, that journey begins with sitting down and courageously closing your eyes to remember, not to regret, but to see clearly what was left unsaid, what was not accepted, what is still stuck in your soul. That person may have gone far away, but maybe they are the mirror of the part of you that you are forgetting. And if you really want to heal, to move on, you need to return to that part of yourself. The child who believed in love, who opened up without hesitation, who gave without calculation. Because sometimes, what needs to be restored is not the relationship, but the connection between you and your own soul. Memory is not something to be held onto. It is a map. And the shadow, when seen, is no longer a shadow. It becomes a guiding light. When you cannot explain why a person is so deeply imprinted in your mind, when all the reasoning has been used to close it, but even a brief dream makes your heart ache, perhaps it is time to stop asking, why do I still miss them? And start asking, what do they symbolize for me? In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, what you are feeling is not simply nostalgia, but a deep symbolic activation from the unconscious. The person, their presence, their eyes, the way they left, or the things left unsaid, all of these are not just memories, they are symbols. And every symbol has a deep psychological source, called an archetype. Jung believed that each of us carries within us a map of the collective unconscious, a place where universal soul archetypes exist, not belonging to any individual, but the result of thousands of years of human experience accumulated in the subconscious. A person you love deeply but cannot keep may be the image of the anima or animus, the feminine soul archetype in men, or the masculine soul archetype in women, representing the unintegrated half of the soul. They come, not just to be loved, but to show you the part of yourself that you have been searching for. That is why the connection with them goes beyond logic. You do not need a long time to bond. do not need to know their background or origin. You just need a moment, a look, a short conversation, and your soul is awakened. It's often described as a soulmate or twin flame, but in Jung's view, it's the awakening of an archetype where a real-life person becomes a symbol of your unlived soul. They're a mirror, someone who touches a depth you didn't know you had inside. And because of that, they're not easily replaced. In his analysis, Jung noted that recurring dreams about someone who is no longer in your waking life are often more than nostalgia. They're a manifestation of an archetype emerging, a dream where you see them but can't touch them. They're behind a glass, or they say something you can't quite make out. That's not your mind playing tricks on you. It's a symbol of your unconscious knocking on your door. It's not asking you to go back to your ex. It's asking you to look at the part of you you were when you were with them. Why is that part so important, you might ask? Because in many cases, people lose themselves in the process of loving, and then they lose the other person, and by default they also lose the part of themselves that loved them truly. Jung believed that the most important reunion is not between two people, but between you and the forgotten part of yourself, and the symbol of that person is the key. They activate in you a sense of belonging, of being understood, of being true to yourself, and then they leave, leaving an unintegrated archetype and a void that you think is due to losing them, but is actually due to losing yourself. This also explains why synchronicity, the phenomenon of meaningful coincidences, often occurs around them. You dream about them on the eve of your birthday. You happen to glance at an old photo, and a few minutes later, someone mentions their name. You pass by a coffee shop, and the song that was once your favorite tune plays in a crowd of strangers. These events are not coincidences, they are signals. Jung once said that when an archetype is strongly present, it will not only manifest in the mind, but also resonate with the outside world. You are not imagining things. You are being called. And the question is not, do they remember me? The question is, am I missing a part of myself that only they could have awakened? Their coming into your life and leaving is not your fault. It is a highly symbolic event, like a portal opening, sending you on a journey back to a deeper self. And if you do not answer that invitation, you will forever be haunted by their image, not because you are not over your love, but because your soul has not yet completed its return to itself. There are people who pass through your life like a flame that lights up a room you thought was extinguished. And when they are gone, you cannot forget that light. Not because you need them, but because you have not learned to light up yourself. Their archetype has not been integrated. The emotions they awakened, the tenderness, the intensity, the trust, the vulnerability, are still left in the darkness of your soul. Only when you return, embrace, love, and relive those qualities without them, does that archetype truly come full circle. They may be the ones who bring you into the light, but you are the one who must learn to stay there alone. Not by erasing their image, but by understanding what they have come to give you. A soft part of you, an intuition that has been overwhelmed by reason, an ability to connect deeply that has been blocked by fear. They are the bearers of symbols. And symbols, according to Jung, are never meaningless. They are always a mirror, a reflection of what you need to face in order to become the full version of yourself. And then one day, when you have relived that part of yourself, you will see them, whether in your mind or in real life, in a different light, no longer with longing or regret, but with gratitude. Because they, whether intentionally or unintentionally, brought that symbol to you. And because of that, you no longer seek love from someone else. You seek harmony within yourself. And if fate does bring them back, it will no longer be a reunion of two old people. It will be a reunion of two souls who know who they are, have recognized each other's archetypes, and no longer have to live in the shadow of anyone else. Symbols don't just live in dreams, they live in you. And every person who passes through your life in an inexplicable way is a sign of your own spiritual awakening. It's not about keeping them. It's about keeping the part of the soul they awakened. When you do, you don't just overcome your memories, you overcome your own shadow. And that's the real reunion, with yourself. There's a stage after loss that almost everyone goes through, whether they realize it or not. It's a stage of denial. You don't cry, you don't feel sad, you don't blame. You even smile when you talk about the past, as if everything has been accepted and overcome. You tell others that you're fine, that it's over, that you've learned a lot and grown from it. But deep down, something isn't true. Some part of you is still holding on. Not because you don't want to let go, but because you don't dare to touch the truth. The truth is that you have never really faced the loss. You are just covering up a wound that is still festering in the unconscious, with rational language. Carl Jung called this ego impotence, when the conscious self tries to maintain a sense of control by denying the uncontrollable. When loss occurs, especially with someone who once made you feel like you are, the ego goes into crisis. It is afraid to look at itself through the broken lens. It is afraid to touch the vulnerability that was exposed when you loved. Afraid to admit that it was helpless, that it was hurt, that it opened up and was not received. And to avoid that, the ego creates defense strategies. Rationalization, escape, displacement, repression. You start entering into new relationships not because you want connection, but because you want to fill the void. You throw yourself into work with double the intensity. As if you were busy enough, the pain wouldn't have a place to enter. You suddenly become more ruthless with your emotions, denying anything that might make you weak. You see others going through the same feeling and tell yourself, I'm not like that anymore. But that's not maturity. That's freezing. And your ego, which prides itself on being strong, is actually trembling behind its own wall. One of the most obvious signs of resistance is that you keep explaining to yourself that it's over, that the person is no longer suitable, that you've learned the lesson. But if that's really the case, why do you still feel a pang when someone mentions them? Why do you freeze for a few seconds every time you pass a familiar place? Why do you still silently follow them, even though you never interact? Because denying the feeling doesn't make it go away. It just sinks deeper, becomes part of the shadow, where all the rejected content is stored. And once it is in the shadow, it is no longer under your control. It starts to control you from the inside, in ways you never expected. Jung once said, "What is not conscious becomes destiny." When you refuse to face the hurt, you will repeat it. Maybe not with the old person, but with the new person who is similar. You will love the new person with the same feelings, with the same fears, with the same expectations that were never met. And then, when everything falls apart, you affirm that love was wrong, that you need to be stronger. But the truth is, you don't need to be stronger. You need to be more honest. You need the courage to say, I am not over it. I still remember, I still regret, and I am willing to look at that pain instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Resistance isn't just in your mind, it's in your body. You feel tired without doing anything too strenuous. You lose sleep for no reason. You become impatient, irritable, or worse, completely disconnected from your emotions. Your body is speaking for your strangled soul. And the more you resist, the more you deny, the more you try to act normal, the more out of place it becomes. Not because you're weak. It's because the ego you're using to prop yourself up is no longer suited to the current situation. It was built to survive, but you're not here to survive. You're here to be. One of the first steps to breaking the ego's powerlessness is to stop. Stop running away. Stop rationalizing. Stop trying to be okay. Sit down, quietly, and ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What am I pretending not to feel? What is it that I have not yet touched? Don't rush to find an answer. Just ask it with absolute honesty. Because in the journey of awakening, the right question is always more important than the comfortable answer. Jung believed that inner transformation cannot come from forcing, but only when we stop controlling and start listening. Listening not with our ears, but with our presence. Listening to the memories that resurface uninvited. Listening to the tightness that comes when someone's name is mentioned. Listening to the recurring dream you never tell anyone about. listening to your own body when it rejects a new interaction because it feels insincere. Every sign is a call from the unconscious, where your soul is waiting to be seen fully. Resistance is the ego's natural reflex, but the turning point only happens when you choose not to resist, when you let the pain say what it needs to say, when you stop resisting the old emotion and start walking into it like a familiar room where you once kept important things. That is not a step back. That is the most courageous act, because only when you go through the pain without avoiding it can you reclaim the soul that was buried there. No one can help you through this stage, but you are not alone. Jung called it a journey back to the center of your being, where there is no more pretending, no more covering up, only truth, darkness, and light coexist. And when you reach that point, you will realize that loss is not the end. It is the beginning of the deepest encounter, the encounter with yourself, no longer through the lens of the ego, but through the eyes of a soul that has stopped resisting, a soul that is ready to see everything. There is a moment when you can no longer pretend. It does not come as a thunderclap or a dramatic event. It's usually very quiet, very small. Sometimes it's just a moment when you burst into tears while washing the dishes, or when you're walking, suddenly hear an old song and suddenly stop in the middle of the road. Or sometimes it's when you're sitting alone in your room, the light from your phone screen reflecting on your expressionless face, and suddenly you feel so empty that nothing can hold you back anymore. That's the moment of breaking. Not because you're weak, but because the part that's been hidden for so long finally finds a way out. Carl Jung called this the rise of the shadow. It is the sum total of all the parts of yourself you have denied, avoided, and never allowed to express. It could be the vulnerability, the anger, the jealousy, the hurt, or even the capacity for deep love that you have kept hidden after being rejected. The shadow is not just the bad part, it is the part that has not been lived, and when it rises, it does not knock gently. It often comes as an explosion, a pain that seems unreasonable, a flood of emotions that leaves you panicking because you feel like you are losing control. But in that moment, the truth is revealed. There are no more excuses, no more rational guidance, no more "I'm fine" facade. There is only a naked, exhausted, honest self. You begin to see how hard you have tried not to feel. How many actions, decisions, choices have you made to avoid facing a pain that has never been decoded? You are not just missing someone, you are carrying a layer of undigested memories. And each time you avoid it, the darkness grows. You may have thought you had overcome it, because you no longer cry, no longer search, no longer care about the old things. But the truth is that the shadow does not disappear when you stop thinking about the other person. It only becomes quieter, more insidious, and permeates the decisions you make without understanding why. It makes you withdraw from new feelings, makes you overreact when someone says something innocuous, makes you lose faith in your own ability to be loved. When the shadow is most evident, it is not when you are worse. It is when you are closest to true healing. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You cannot be your whole self if you continue to deny your shadow. And the person who broke you may be the person who represents that shadow, not because they are the cause, but because they are the symbol. Maybe they left at a time when you were most open. Maybe they were the first person to see you deeply and truly. Maybe they were the person you thought, "This time, maybe I don't need to defend myself." And then when everything fell apart, you didn't just lose them, you lost the part of yourself that dared to come alive. The shadow grew not because they were gone, but because you closed yourself off after they left. But the shadow didn't come to destroy you. It came to be integrated, so that you could look at the hurt without fear, so that you could know that inside the anger was an unspoken disappointment, that behind the silence was a scream that needed to be acknowledged, that behind your struggle is a child who just wants to be held without being judged. When you can sit in that moment, in the midst of the chaos of emotions, and stop running, you begin to truly be reborn. Facing your shadow doesn't require you to do anything grand. Sometimes it just requires you to admit, I still hurt. It just requires you to stop blaming the other person and instead ask yourself, what did I lose in myself when they left? It could be innocence. It could be trust. It could be the part of you that loved life, that believed in the future, that thought love was worth pursuing. Allow those parts to come back, not to weaken you, but to make you more real than ever. Jung described this process as a journey underground, where all light is gone, where the ego no longer has control. Only in the darkness can you truly meet the parts you have forgotten. And it is from that darkness that the light emerges. Not the light from outside, but the light that emanates from the wholeness within. When you no longer need to hide the pain, no longer fear being hurt again, it is also the time to step out of the shadow, not by destroying it, but by making peace with it. The moment of rupture is not as scary as you think. It is a signal, an invitation. The first awakening for you to enter the deepest stage of the journey, returning to your whole self. A person who has loved wholeheartedly, has been hurt, has collapsed, but still has the courage to face and move forward without denying any part of yourself. Because only when you can look straight into the darkness can you truly understand what light is. Not everyone is ready to go through that moment. Many people stop at the edge, turn their backs, and choose to live half, love half, trust half. But if you are here, if you have read this, maybe you are being called. Not to hurt more, but to see, to accept, to release. And from there, you no longer need anyone else to complete you. You no longer need someone to fill the void, because you have sat in that void, talked to the shadow, and reclaimed the soul that was once left behind. Then, you are no longer afraid of breaking, because you know the crack is where the light can enter. And from within, something new is beginning to form, not from rejecting the old you, but from having the courage to love yourself, even when you are broken. After all the breaking, hiding, and facing, a silence begins to spread. Not the empty silence of loneliness or suffering, but a deep, complete silence, where you are no longer trying to fill anything. This is the awakening stage. No noise, no climax, no grand moment signaling that you have overcome it all. It just happens quietly, like the morning when you wake up and realize you're no longer resisting the memory. You don't try to name the pain. You don't try to push it away. You simply live with it, as a part of you. Awakening is not a victory over yourself. It's when you stop trying to fight. When you stop having to prove that you've overcome. When you realize that there's nothing to overcome. Loss is a part of life, just like love, sadness, longing, and unfulfilled dreams. And you don't have to erase them in order to move on. You just have to learn to live with them, without letting them define you. Carl Jung once wrote that wholeness comes not from the elimination of darkness, but from the ability to hold light and darkness in the same being. When you accept that you can love deeply and be deeply hurt, that you can be weak and strong in the same moment, you begin to experience true silence. No more inner screaming, no more invisible dialogue in your head, no more feeling like you have to find the answer to everything. There is just you, simple, real, complete in your imperfect state. The silence after the storm is not the emptiness you feared. It does not make you want to run away. Instead, it draws you back to yourself. You begin to notice every breath, every step, every little detail of your daily life that you were previously unable to notice because you were so caught up in the pain. Nothing seems to have changed, but you are no longer the same person. You no longer see the world through the lens of lack. You no longer need someone to complete you, not because you are closed, but because you are open, from within. One of the clearest signs of awakening is that you no longer need an apology, no longer need a return, no longer need a reason to leave. You don't forgive in the sense of forgiveness. You simply stop blaming, not because the other person is right, but because you no longer want to hold on to the old story as part of your identity. You have come to understand that everyone is on their own journey, and the pain they caused you, if any, is only a small part of the larger story you are writing. You no longer ask, why did they leave? Why didn't it work out? You start asking, what can I learn from this? What part of me has been awakened? What is my soul longing for that I never dared to admit? These questions do not seek answers from the outside. They simply invite you to turn inward, quietly, gently, as if you were talking to yourself after a long time of being lost. And then you begin to live differently, not by making big changes, but by making small, daily choices. You choose relationships that make you feel like you, instead of relationships that make you try to be loved. You choose peace over drama. You choose truth over compromise. You choose to stay with your feelings instead of trying to run away. And gradually, you realize you have become the most authentic version of yourself, without any external nudge. Awakening does not make you stop missing, stop loving, stop hurting. It just makes you stop being controlled by those feelings. You can still think about them, the ones who left, but not with regret, but with a quiet nod. They were part of your journey back home. They were your symbol, your mirror, someone who awakened a level of consciousness in you that no one else could reach. And now that you have received that, you can move on, not with a broken heart, but with a heart that was once broken, but now is still enough to beat a new life on its own. In that silence, you no longer wait for anything to happen. You begin to see yourself as part of the flow. No need to force, no need to hold on. You have awakened, not as someone else, but as yourself, for the first time, fully and peacefully. At some point, the old question returns, will they come back? But this time, it is no longer a nagging question, no longer a desperate call from long sleepless nights. It becomes a quiet thought, passing like the wind, an idea that no longer holds supreme power in your heart. Because now, what you need is not someone else's return, but the complete return of yourself. In the healing journey, the reconciliation stage is an important turning point. Not to reconcile with the other person, but to reconcile with what happened, with their choices, with your choices, and most deeply, with reality. The reality that not every deep relationship is meant to last. That not everyone who awakens the divine in you will necessarily be with you all the way. And you begin to understand that some encounters are not meant to last, but to open up a new level of consciousness. Some people are sent, not to stay, but to make you see the forgotten part of yourself. Maybe they come back, maybe they don't, but you no longer place your value on that. They are no longer the center of your pain or your hope. They become part of the journey, a chapter in a book that you are calm enough to turn the page on. Not by forgetting, but by integrating. Not because you've closed the door, but because you no longer need to open it in the hope that someone will come in and complete you. Jung once said that reconciliation is the result of working with the unconscious, when fragmented parts of the psyche are reunited. It doesn't come from an external action, but from an internal structural change. And you begin to feel that change in the way you respond. When someone mentions their name, you no longer choke up. When you accidentally see an old image, you no longer hide. When you hear a song that was once a shared memory, you smile. Not because the emotion is gone, but because the emotion no longer controls you. In some cases, a comeback happens. The person contacts you again, wants to reconnect, or simply wants to see you. And when it happens, you are no longer the one waiting. You are the one observing. You don't see it as a reward for your patience or a miracle from the universe. You see it as an opportunity, not to rehash an old story, but to see who you are now. If you accept them back, it's no longer because you need someone to fill a void, but because you see someone who can accompany you on a new journey, where you no longer burden the other person with hurt, where you enter the relationship with eyes open and a heart no longer bound by old scripts. But sometimes they don't come back. Not a message, not a sign. They disappear as if they never existed. And you're okay. No more days of longing. No more wondering where you went wrong. You stop attaching their presence to your self-worth. Instead, you begin to realize that their absence has given you a gift that presence sometimes can't. Emotional independence. a deep understanding of yourself, and the ability to love unconditionally, not for others, but for yourself. The moment you realize you no longer need an explanation, you know you've truly reconciled. There's no one to apologize to. There's nothing to regret. There's no expectation that if they understood you better, things would have been different. Because the truth is, if they couldn't stay when you opened up, then their departure was an integral part of your journey to becoming the person you are today. Reconciliation isn't about forgiving in a noble way. It's about seeing the whole picture. You, them, the circumstances, the timing, the unintentional hurts, and the seemingly selfish choices that were necessary for both of you. You no longer see them as the ones who hurt you, but as the ones who made you grow. And in that growth, you appreciate both the best and the worst moments. There's a kind of love that doesn't need a happy ending to be complete. It's the love that allows you to see yourself, even when it's not reciprocated the way you wanted it to be. It is the kind of love that makes you go into darkness, break down, and then be reborn. And whether they come back or not, you have returned to your truest self, something no one else can do for you. So if one day they appear before you again, you can smile and ask how far they have gone. But if they never come back, you can still smile in silence and know that it is you who has returned. Returned to the wholeness that loss once took away. But the healing journey has given you back, in the quietest and deepest way. And that is the most important reunion in life, reunion with yourself. In the end, you realize that they were not a mistake. They were not a chapter to be erased, nor a wound to be healed by denial. They are part of your journey back to yourself, the ones who opened the first door to lead you into the deep inner land, the place you were afraid to enter alone. And if there is anything certain after all, it is. They did not come to stay, but to awaken. We often think of awakening as an encounter with something new, an adventure, an enlightenment from the outside. But in fact, the truest awakening always happens from within, when we dare to look at the part of ourselves that we have rejected, feared, forgotten. And strangely enough, the people who bring us to that point are often the ones who hurt us the most. Not because they do it on purpose, but because their soul accidentally matches the unreleased part of ourselves. They are the living symbol of a part of our soul that we have never touched. Their presence touches the deepest level, where reason loses control, where all the masks are peeled away, where only you remain, intact in your most fragile and honest. You may have thought, if they hadn't come, maybe I wouldn't have hurt so much. But if they hadn't come, maybe you would never have started the conversation with yourself. You would have continued to live in the same roles, carrying the same wounds, believing in the same definitions of love and self. It was the collision with them, with something deep, intense, inexplicable, that caused your entire defense system to collapse. And in that very breakdown, another version was born. Not stronger, not more perfect, simply more real. Carl Jung once said, "You will be asked not who you are to others, but how much you have become to yourself." The journey of awakening is not measured by the number of times you stop crying, but by your ability to sit in the pain without running away and still know that you are not broken. And perhaps you need someone who touches you to the core like that, to know that you can go through it all without losing yourself. When you look back, you will not only see the beautiful memories, nor only see the hurt. You will see a journey, from the first day you met them, when you did not understand why they moved you, until the last day when you sat silently in a familiar coffee shop, no longer expecting them to return. You will realize how far you have gone, not in space, but in consciousness, not in external image, but in inner depth. And that is why their presence, even for a short time, is a greater gift than you ever thought. Maybe they do not know. Maybe they are on their own journey. But that does not matter anymore. Because you are old enough to understand that each soul has its own time to awaken. And if the meeting between two people gives rise to a transformation within a person, then that meeting is sacred, no matter how it ends. There are people you only meet once, but remember for the rest of your life. There are people you thought would be together until the end, but then quietly parted ways. There are relationships that start as fate, but end like an unfulfilled dream. And you used to think, that's unfinished. But when you are quiet enough, you will see that nothing is unfinished. Every meeting is timely. Every departure is timely. And every person, whether they leave or stay, leaves a mark on you that only you can understand its sacredness. They are not the definition of you, but they are part of the overall picture. They are the color that makes the other parts appear more clearly. They are the highlight that highlights what you once did not recognize in yourself. They are the mirror that makes you dare to look straight at the weak part that you have always denied. And maybe they learned something from you too, something you didn't need to know. Because awakening is not a parallel journey, it's a personal journey, starting with a collision with another person, but always ending with a return to yourself. And now, when everything has settled down, you don't need them to come back to feel valuable. You don't need a happy ending to believe that love is real. You just need to know. You once felt something sacred, and that was enough to change you forever. No one can take back what you became after they passed by. Whether they realize it or not, you may love again. You may open up, but you will never love the way you loved them. Not because they were special, but because that love has done its job. Brought you to the point where you no longer need love to fill a void, but love as a way to share yourself, completely, honestly, fearlessly. In the end, that person is no longer a question. They are the answer. Not to whether you are lovable or worthy, but to what is inside you that is still waiting to be seen. They are the beginning of a journey that you thought you started for them, but was really for you, for a deeper part of you that always wanted to return. And if there is one thing you take with you after all this, it is this. They are not the ones you keep, they are the ones you remember, as the ones who led you into the darkness so you could find your own light. And that light, once found, will never go out again.